Alright, now we're back at our assignment page, and I want to first lay out a few settings on our cameras, and then walk through again some of the specifics of this assignment. So I'm going to have my camera sim open again so you can see that. If you feel like it, you can also play around with the Canon simulator as well. I also have given a link in our assignment page to what would be an interesting 3D model of a kind of generic basic camera. These are the ones that I check out for our photo class. It's called a Nikon D3300, and this will help me illustrate some of the camera settings for you. And then I'm going to go over slightly and very briefly just the basics, how to hold your camera, and the right and wrong ways to do that. So why don't we start with going through right here, set your camera to the following. Now you're going to set your ISO to the lowest setting. In general, this is going to be ISO 100. This will be the sharpest it can be. Now I want you to note though that this might need to change depending on your light conditions. The reason I say this is that ideally I want you to start by shooting at a shutter speed of a 60th of a second, meaning that you're gonna use that as your foundation for holding your camera, because right now all we're doing is holding our camera. We're not using tripods. And so in order to hold still enough, in order to not create motion or blur in how we hold our camera, or our ability to hold still enough to photograph a moving figure of some sort, like a portrait or something like that, a 60th of a second is a good rule of starting at that shutter speed. It's fast enough to freeze things, but also slow enough in order to let in a good amount of light in order to operate with cameras that maybe are a little more affordable, a little cheaper, and so on. But we're going to start at ISO 100, which is our lowest setting. But in order to achieve bracketing, we may need to change our ISO when we hit a wall in where we can't overexpose or underexpose any farther because we don't have the room anymore. Now, if I scroll down here, setting your camera at ISO 100 to begin, thinking of a 60th of a second as your, maybe I'll write that right in here, starting at a 1/60th of a second for your shutter speed. Starting. And then starting with a file format size of using, or a file format of JPEG or TIFF if your camera does that by default, instead of using what's called RAW. Don't worry about the terminology just yet, but JPEG will be a file that's compressed and is smaller in order to not eat up the memory on your memory card in your camera. Now, I don't want you again to use flash. At this point, we're going to be capturing light, not generating light, and I want you to put your camera in the manual mode, in M mode. Now, if I were looking at my Nikon here and looking from above at the dials, you can see there's some dial, on the dial there's some graphics, and the M is going to be your manual mode. I'm not too concerned with you using manual mode on your lens. If you want to use autofocus for right now, that's totally fine with me. Now, in order to set that image quality in the back to what would be called JPEG, right now this on a Nikon normal, or and this normal and L are called large. Those are JPEG formats. The only time it won't be in JPEG format is when it says RAW. So if it says anything else other than RAW, you're good to go at this moment. If you want to change the image size or image quality to larger, sometimes this will say normal or fine. Those are going to give you higher quality detail in a JPEG format, but will eat up more space on your memory card, so just keep that in mind. Now, in order to get to this menu setting, you select menu on an icon and the camera icon, and it will bring up these settings. Okay. Now, going back to our assignment, the process by which you're going to carry out this assignment. We're doing bracketing right now. So you're going to choose a scene to photograph. Say, for instance, you're going to photograph a coffee mug on a table. You're going to start out you're going to shoot 10 total images of that scene. You're going to choose 30 different scenes, which will bring us up to that number of 300 images for the assignment. The very first image you're going to take, and that's going to be a correctly exposed picture based on your camera's light metering. So if I go to the camera simulator again, if I were looking and I decided I was going to start at a 60th of a second, I'm going to bring my ISO down to 100. I'm going to up this, right? So let's say, for instance, that brings me to here. ISO 100, 60th of a second. It's a sunny day, and my light reading in this scene is going to give me right down the middle as a proper exposure. Okay? Now, only using shutter speed in this instance, this first set of photographs, I want you to take 2 more images underexposing in one stop in each. Underexposed one stop once, then a second time, and then I want you to take 2 more images, pictures overexposed. So if I came here, I would go 2 stops underexposed, which would be this direction, 1 and then 2, and I'm using, I was going to just use shutter speed, sorry. So 2 stops. 1 stop here would be 125th of a second, 2 stops would be 320th of a second. So I've created a faster shutter speed, which lets in less light, which means I'm underexposing that image with these settings currently. So right now you've shot 1 correctly, then 1 image, then 2 images, and then using shutter speed again, you're going to overexpose. So I'll come back to 60th of a second, and I'm going to go 1 and 2. Notice I went down to a 15th of a second. You can try this, but if you want, and you found yourself only wanting to stick with a 60th of a second, you would have to change your ISO in order to achieve these settings. I'm okay with either way. You're good to understand and learn their dependency on one another either way. If you want for this demo to go down to a 15th of a second, that's fine. So that should bring you to 5 images at this point. Now, I want you to retake that correct exposure once again. So I'm going to bring us back to this correct exposure, but this time I want you to underexpose using aperture only, and 2 stops overexposed using aperture only. So again, I'm taking another one correctly, so this should be a duplicate of your very first photograph. Then, only using aperture, I'm going to underexpose, 1 stop and then 2 stops. And notice the number got higher, meaning the aperture got smaller, meaning less light is coming in. Okay? Now I come back to here, and I'm going to go in the other direction where I'm opening up my lens and taking 2 more photographs. That should land you at having 10 images at this point, okay? And again, note, you may need to change your ISO in order to do this. Now, again, you're choosing 30 different scenes. So the first 10 images I shot were just of that coffee mug we talked about, where I'm using shutter speed to overexpose and underexpose, and using aperture to underexpose and overexpose. And I'm going 2 stops in either direction. All right. Now, I've given you an example of bracketing so you can see it in written form as well. But I would recommend playing with this camera simulator first, see if that works, how that helps you understand what we're talking about. And again, don't worry too heavily about whether or not you're freezing an object or whether or not you're getting or thinking about depth of field at this point. We'll get to that. Now, in order to understand a little bit more of this, I just want to make sure that we're this is a link that I'll offer you. You can use it if you want. I'm not sure it'll be too necessary for you guys, but I want to make sure that you're holding your camera properly. Now, this is a graphic that's going to show what is a proper way to hold a camera. This is a person who's putting the strap to their camera around their neck. Another way that I like to hold a camera is that I wrap the strap around my wrist twice. So in order to ensure that if it falls, I catch it with my wrist if my camera falls. Now, I think you should do what feels natural in terms of putting either your left or your right eye up to the camera, or keeping your eye open that's not looking through the viewfinder or not. It's totally your call. Either way works. And I'm one of those odd people that I actually use my left eye to look through a viewfinder, and I've never had any issues. So the only thing I'm concerned about is that you make sure that your hand is underneath your lens in this position. This is going to allow it to act more like a tripod. It's going to mimic that, where you can use your elbow to support your camera by embedding it into your chest or into your body, to your torso. It's going to give you a little bit more stability in order to hold your camera more still. The right and wrong, so this would be the wrong way to hold your camera. You're not giving any support or stability to your camera, but you're also using this in a way that would easily get your pinky or hand in front of your lens, which would be a real bummer. So again, this is the correct posture for holding your camera. Now, I'll also include an image here. This is going to be a cheat sheet. You can print this out. It's a good size to keep in your wallet or keep in your camera bag. That may help. It's going to lay out again the aperture, and it's going to show the numbers corresponding with your aperture setting, and same with shutter speed here, and then same with ISO. It's demonstrating the noisier it gets, the higher sensitivity setting you have on your camera. Now, one last thing I want to show here. In order on this Nikon to easily change some of these settings, I want to show you some of the dials. On a Nikon here, and often cameras have something like this, there's a function button that will bring up a menu dialog on the back of your camera, which will allow you to dial in shutter speed or aperture. And you'll see there's a dial right here on this Nikon in the back that lets you toggle through shutter speed or aperture. On this Nikon as well, you'll see, and a lot of cameras have this as well, there will be icons that will guide you. This one has an icon here that looks like an aperture. If you hold down this button and select that dial, it'll allow you to change the aperture. If you don't hold out that button, it'll dial through the shutter speed. And if you hold down the function button here, it'll allow you to dial through the ISO. So I would read through your camera manual and get specifics on how it dials through those quickly. That'll give you a lot more latitude in your ability to shoot with your camera. All right.